For America's most troubled tech giant, this week, the crisis went from bad to existential. In August, the president, Donald Trump, called for Intel's CEO, Lip-Bu Tan, to resign immediately. This political bombshell landed on a company already reeling from a catastrophic technological failure. A new Reuters report confirmed its comeback chip, the 18A process, is commercially unviable. And a new report from the Wall Street Journal reveals a third front in this war, a civil war inside Intel's own boardroom, with a new CEO at odds with his board over the company's entire strategy. A failed technology, a hostile White House, a divided board. This is the perfect storm for a corporate collapse. The question is no longer just, can Intel execute a comeback? But a more fundamental one, can Intel survive itself? Here's the real story. These are not separate crises. They are all symptoms of a single, brutal power struggle for the soul of the company. We're not just watching a turnaround attempt, we are deconstructing a company at war with itself. Intel's crisis didn't happen overnight. It was a slow-motion catastrophe, the result of a company losing a two-front war against both its fiercest rivals. On the first front, manufacturing, Intel lost its technological crown to TSMC. The fatal blow was a catastrophic miscalculation in the mid-2010s. At the time, the entire industry was racing towards a new, essential technology called extreme ultraviolet lithography, or EUV, the only tool capable of printing the microscopic circuits needed for the next generation of advanced chips. But Intel's leadership held back, believing EUV would never work. While Intel was stuck trying to perfect a technological dead end, TSMC went all in on EUV, mastering the process. This wasn't just a delay, it was a fundamental divergence in strategy. That single decision set Intel back by half a decade, leading to a cascade of production delays and the complete loss of its lead in manufacturing technology, a position it had held for over 20 years. On the second front, product design, Intel was systematically outmaneuvered by a resurgent AMD. While Intel stagnated, missing what some analysts called every single strategic inflection, it left a massive opening for its rival. As data centers became the new center of the computing universe, AMD attacked not with raw power, but with superior strategy. It focused relentlessly on the single most critical metric for modern data centers, performance per unit of energy. As data centers became ever more energy hungry, AMD's efficient designs became the smarter choice. The result was a stunning reversal. In 2022, Intel's data center revenue was 3 times larger than AMD's. By early 2025, AMD had eclipsed it. The impact was a pincer movement. Intel could no longer build the world's best chips, and the chips it could build were no longer the undisputed best. The financial damage was catastrophic. In 2024, Intel had posted an $18.8 billion net loss, its first since 1986. It was against this backdrop of decline that then CEO Pat Gelsinger made his final desperate bet, a 5 nodes in 4 years plan, culminating in the 18A process, a technological Hail Mary designed to leapfrog TSMC and restore Intel's dominance. But behind the scenes, Intel's board was losing faith in Gelsinger's high-risk gambit. The situation had become so dire that they began considering the corporate equivalent of a surrender. In 2025, a report from the New York Times revealed that the board, with encouragement from the Trump administration, was working on a plan to turn over the operation of its chip-making plants to TSMC. This wasn't a partnership, it was a bailout, with TSMC potentially taking control of Intel's factories to resolve the long-running crisis. This internal civil war culminated in Gelsinger's ouster and the appointment of Lip-Bu Tan, a new leader brought in not to champion the old plan, but to manage its inevitable collapse. By April, TSMC's CEO would publicly deny any joint venture talks were happening, leaving Intel on its own. With no external rescue possible, Intel's fate now hinged entirely on the execution of a failing plan it had inherited. By the way, connecting these kinds of strategic signals, from a decade-old manufacturing decision to a secret bailout plan, is the core of our analysis in the ARPU newsletter. We focus on deconstructing the why behind the headlines, not just the what. We'll leave a link in the description if you want to dive deeper. And Intel's execution is a commercial and technical disaster. In chip manufacturing, the single most important metric is yield. Think of it as a success rate. For every 100 chips you try to make, how many are actually usable? This number determines everything from cost to profitability. According to a Reuters report, as of this summer, Intel's yield on the 18A process was just 10%. To put that number in perspective, sources told Reuters that Intel typically aims for a yield north of 50% before even beginning mass production, and doesn't see real profitability until that number reaches 70 to 80%. A 10% success rate isn't just a slow start, it means the process is fundamentally unprofitable. The reason for this catastrophic yield is a high rate of defects. The report states that the Panther Lake chips, the first product slated for 18A, had about 3 times too many defects to even start high-volume production. This wasn't an accident. It was the direct result of a desperate strategy. Intel's 18A process involved introducing newer technologies all at once. It was a high-risk gamble to skip multiple steps and catch up to TSMC in a single leap. But in the unforgiving physics of semiconductor manufacturing, you don't get to skip steps. The result wasn't a leap forward, it was a stumble. And this technical failure is already showing up on the balance sheet. On its latest earnings call, Intel CFO confirmed that the early ramp of Panther Lake is a predominant driver of lower gross margins because, in his words, the cost per wafer is going to be higher. This is corporate speak for a simple reality. When 90% of what you produce has to be thrown away, your costs skyrocket. The Hail Mary pass wasn't just intercepted, it was never going to be completed. And to understand why, you have to understand the insurmountable lead of the company Intel was trying to beat. The failure of 18A wasn't a surprise. It was the predictable outcome of challenging an opponent that leads in every critical metric. First, consider the financial chasm. The foundry business is a game of immense capital. In its most recent quarter, Intel's foundry division reported an operating loss of $3.2 billion. In 2023, that same division lost $7 billion. During that same period, TSMC generated $9 billion in free cash flow in what was considered a challenging year for the industry. TSMC is a cash-generating machine. Intel's foundry is a cash furnace. This financial advantage directly fuels a widening technology gap. While Intel was struggling to get its 18A process to work, TSMC management stated that Intel's technology, scheduled for late 2025, is only comparable in performance to the 3nm process that TSMC has already been mass-producing for months. By the time 18A is scheduled to launch, TSMC will be moving to its next-generation 2nm node. Intel isn't just one step behind. According to TSMC's own analysis, it is a full 2 years behind. But the most damning evidence of TSMC's lead comes from Intel itself. Intel's plan to regain independence is completely dependent on its rival. To keep its own products competitive against AMD, Intel has been forced to become one of TSMC's largest customers, placing orders worth an estimated $10 billion by 2025. And the recent Reuters report confirms this dependency isn't ending. An Intel executive revealed that its next major chip, Nova Lake, will also be partly manufactured by TSMC. Intel's plan to beat its rival requires it to pay its rival billions of dollars. This is the reality of TSMC's moat. It is no longer just a competitive advantage. It is a structural dominance of the entire industry. And it's why Intel's new leadership has been forced to abandon the dream of dominance and pivot to a new, more brutal strategy: survival. This reality, that the gap with TSMC is now insurmountable, is precisely why Intel's new leadership was forced to abandon the dream of dominance. The failure of 18A wasn't just the end of a product roadmap. It was the public verdict on a failed strategy, giving the new CEO Lip-Bu Tan the mandate to execute a brutal but necessary pivot. His philosophy is a direct repudiation of his predecessor's ambition. On the latest earnings call, he attacked the field of dreams strategy of building massive factories with the hope that customers would show up, calling those investments unwise and excessive. But the report from the Wall Street Journal reveals that Tan's mandate was never absolute. From the moment he took the job, he was locked in a power struggle with his own board. The report confirms that Tan and board chairman Frank Yeary immediately disagreed about questions as central as whether the company should stay in the manufacturing business or exit it entirely. While the new CEO was trying to save the foundry, members of his own board were still trying to sell it off. It was in this context of a boardroom civil war that Tan's survival plan took shape, not as a clean strategy, but as a series of hard-fought battles. First, the corporate demolition. Intel is cutting its workforce by up to 25%. Tan has already reduced management layers by approximately 50%. The multi-billion-dollar megafabs planned for Germany and Poland have been canceled. Second, the strategic retreat. Future factory investments will be based solely on secured volume commitments, not on hope. And third, a ruthless focus on the core business, with plans to sell off multi-billion-dollar units now deemed non-essential. But even as he executed this pivot, his hands were being tied. The journal reports that Tan's attempts to raise new capital were stalled by the board. His efforts to acquire a critical AI company were blocked. This is the critical insight. The survival plan is not a unified vision. It is a fractured compromise executed by a CEO who is fighting for control of his own company. And this internal battle for survival is about to be hit by an external assault. But a logical plan is not the same as a successful one. And Intel's path to survival is a gauntlet, with 3 critical hurdles that could derail the entire comeback. The first, and most significant, is the execution trap. For the last decade, Intel's core problem has not been a lack of strategy, but a crisis of execution. The failure of 18A is not an isolated incident. An analysis from Ars Technica described it as part of a decade-long pattern going back to early delays for Intel's 14-nanometer process in 2013. From manufacturing delays to product missteps, the company has consistently failed to deliver on its own roadmaps. The question now is fundamental. Can a company fix a deep-seated cultural problem of execution while simultaneously undergoing its most brutal restructuring in history? The second hurdle is the competition pincer. Intel is not restructuring in a vacuum. It is trying to fix a flat tire in the middle of a Formula One race. While Intel is focused inward, its rivals are accelerating. In the server market, Intel's Core x86 franchise, AMD has already eclipsed it in data center chip revenue. And in the AI market that Intel hopes to re-enter, NVIDIA controls an estimated 90% of the data center GPU business. Intel's survival plan depends on stabilizing its market share, but its rivals are not just competing, they are actively consuming the territory Intel needs to survive. But the final hurdle is the most immediate and existential. It's not a market force or an internal weakness. It is a direct political assault. On August 7th, President Trump posted on Truth Social, "The CEO of Intel is highly conflicted and must resign immediately. There is no other solution to this problem." The public justification, amplified by Senator Tom Cotton, centered on Tan's past business ties to China, framing him as a national security risk for a company receiving billions in CHIPS Act funding. But this external attack landed on a company already paralyzed by civil war. The Wall Street Journal confirms that Tan feels his hands have been tied by the board to fix the company. This is the ultimate crisis. The CEO hired to execute a turnaround is being blocked by his board internally and is now being targeted for removal by the White House externally. Intel is now a company fighting for its life against its rivals, against its government, and against itself. So, we return to the central question. Can Intel make a comeback? A month ago, the answer depended on technology and strategy. Today, it depends on pure political and corporate survival. The Intel that dreamed of dominating the industry again is dead. The 18A failure was its funeral. The new Intel, the one with a logical plan for survival, is now paralyzed, at war with the White House and at war with itself. The CEO's survival plan is dead on arrival if he himself doesn't survive. This internal collapse has profound consequences for America's entire industrial strategy. The US government bet billions via the CHIPS Act on its national champion. That champion is now consumed by a civil war and under direct attack from the White House. With America's chosen alternative in disarray, the world's reliance on Taiwan's Silicon Shield is now more absolute than ever, deepening the strategic risk for the entire global economy. This power vacuum at the heart of America's chip strategy raises critical second-order questions. What is the endgame for the civil war inside Intel's board? And with the company now a political target, could it become a takeover candidate, ripe for being broken up by rivals or private equity? These are the power dynamics we deconstruct every week in our newsletter, ARPU. It's designed for anyone who wants to understand not just what's happening in tech, but why it's happening and what it means for the businesses behind the products. You can subscribe at the link in the description below. Thanks for watching.